So, one of the things I used to love to do, and this is going to sound like I'm just repeating myself, but I promise that I'm not just going to talk about video games like I did yesterday. One of my take two, one of my favorite things to do as a kid when I was like, what, say 12 or 13 was walk up to a Kmart and chill out there for a couple hours. Now, that just sounds weird right off the bat. Like maybe I should have my own Netflix drama comedy. But what I would do is I didn't have Pokemon Gold or Silver yet, and the electronics section at Kmart did. So I would spend hours there, probably more time than I should have. Um, but anyway, I'm honestly surprised that nobody told me like, hey, you can't be here for so long. But they pretty much let me stay as long as I wanted to. Um, yeah. And if I somehow happen to have some pocket change, there was a Little Caesars in there that I'd go check out, and I could maybe like get a slice of pizza. And if it was a particularly good day, I'd get a donut. And I'm like, woohoo, that was great. So back then, a video game would cost about maybe, well, on the Game Boy, maybe about $20. So not a lot has changed. Not, um, well, we don't have handheld consoles anymore, really. I think that Nintendo had a monopoly on that for the longest time. Other video game systems would try to have a handheld system, and really the only one who ever came close to competing with them was PlayStation when they had the PS Vita. So, but I never even got to touch one of those. I don't know how powerful it is, but from secondhand accounts I've heard the graphics were phenomenal for the time. Anyway, um, yeah, it's so interesting that really Nintendo realized they had to do two things. They knew that Xbox and PlayStation were kind of dominating consoles. Smartphones were really like they gave them a run for their money because people will get a new smartphone every year or whatever, and their games or whatever can stay on for a while. Like you just go back to the store and download it. So they do this ingenious thing and come up with the Nintendo Switch. I didn't really get to play the Nintendo DS, any of the iterations. Well, my brother owned one for a while. I think he still might have one. And I remember I bought a copy of Pokemon, I think it was Pearl, the original one. I I got to a certain point, but I don't remember finishing it. Kind of wish I had though. That's when I sort of fell off the Pokemon bandwagon. I really ought to get Sword and Shield. Honestly, the most recent Pokemon game that I've played on the Switch was Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu. It's funny, I really thought that I would love that game, being that it was like a remake of Red and Blue. Now, I don't know if it's just the fact that I'm 34 now. If it was just, I've grown older, so of course it's not going to be the same. I mean, obviously it wouldn't. But I think I would like to believe that, the something was changed about it that altered the gameplay. Now, I'm sure there's an element of nostalgia in my experience of it, but I think they changed just enough to where I didn't find it as satisfying. So one of the things I really didn't like was not being able to battle Pokemon in the wild. Like I think most RPGs, like turn-based RPGs, are basically grind sessions. You fight, you get experience, and you can move on to the next challenge. What made Pokemon great was the fact that you could switch it up between what your objective was. You wanted to battle, you could get experience and level up. You wanted to, if you got bored with that, you could try capturing some Pokemon you didn't have, maybe. There was that level of variety in it. But with the Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee, they altered that significantly. The thing, so now your main thing was you you were supposed the main focus was you capture Pokemon. Uh, Immediately you try to do that, and I guess they were trying to tie it into Pokemon Go, which I played for a little bit when it first came out, and it was huge and massive, and just everyone was nuts. It's one of those few times in life where I feel that real life felt like an episode of South Park. Um, it was just, yeah, it was mental. Anyway, I I do wish they had kept that mechanic of battling, and if you decide, hey, I want to capture it, then I can. But it felt like there was less to do in the game. Now, for all those, well, that's really my main complaint. I remember, I think the only other complaint I would have is, what would it be? Oh yeah, um, the fly move in the HM fly technique. That's been changed, so it's not like you just go, you could go to a different town or whatever. It feels like it's basically just been turned into the bicycle move, except you're on a flying Pokemon. Now, for all its faults, I do have to say there are a lot of things that I like about it that are different from the original game. One thing that I loved was the fact that you didn't have to go to a PC to access the Pokemon boxes and switch characters out. That was great. It's a real shame they couldn't have done that in the original, but that could have just been due to the technical limitations of the Game Boy and the Game Boy cartridges. Although I don't see why it would have to be at a specific location. Another thing I like is they develop a bit more lore in the story. Like there's more backstory given to the Cubone in oh shoot, I forgot the name. I'm gonna sound like such a bad Pokemon nerd. But anyway, what's the town that's like got like a oh shoot. It's a very creepy, I think it's Saffron City. Yeah. Um Suddenly my amazing memory fails me. But anyway, there's so in the original game there was this story of like there's a Cubone whose mother passed away. They really expand upon that lore in a way they couldn't have in the original game. Also, they just add a bit more story details here and there, and I don't know if this was stuff that they came up with, like, oh, let's what if we expanded upon this, or if this is notes from the original game that they had years ago, where they're like, okay, the technology's gotten better, we don't have to streamline it so much. One complaint I've got is the idea that, Ash sort of has two rivals now. Um, One, I forget his name, and the other is, of course, Gary Oak. And Gary isn't even made. Maybe the times are different, and you can't really have like a bully in something. But Gary isn't nearly as bullyish as he used to be. And I guess I should be happy that we're nicer as a society, but at the same time, again, first world problems and coming from the perspective of a grown man. But the great thing about Gary's sort of snarkiness in the original game was it made it that much more satisfying when, like, when you beat him in a battle. Like, because he was so much talk, and when you beat him, it felt like you sort of put him in his place. Like, what are you gonna say now? So, them kind of taming him down, I don't know if they did that consciously or anyway. It's a small thing to complain about, and at this point, I just feel like I'm nitpicking. But anyway, yeah, so I was a little let down, and I kind of feel like I would have been much happier just playing like the old games. But currently, Nintendo doesn't have a way to play Game Boy games on the Switch. I've heard some rumors in the pipeline that they're working on a emulator, kind of like how you get to play Super Nintendo and NES games, but so far it's just rumors. You know, now that I think about it, I think that the other games were just that much more fun. Because played, I remember early into the pandemic, a friend of mine was selling a Game Boy and she had a copy of Pokemon Silver. Um, I went and bought it from her, just the game, because I already had a Game Boy. Anyway, I bought that and I was gonna have the cartridge repaired by this local video game shop, but the guy they had who repairs games, um, yeah, he was part of the susceptible groups that were most prone to COVID, so he was took a leave of absence sort of. So yeah, I never got to get it fixed. Anyway, um, I'm sure I could find somewhere to get it fixed, but or who knows? Maybe if I'm just feeling lazy, I'll just try to find a cartridge that blah, try to find a cartridge that works where like the save battery is still relatively good. Anyway, so yeah, I started up and I tried playing it even though I know I couldn't save the game, and I remembered how much fun it was. Sure, nostalgia has something to do with it, but I remember it's one of those it best exemplifies what Shigeru Miyamoto said about video games, where he said a good game makes you feel as though you've accomplished something. And I kind of feel like that's why people love video games, because currently in society there's not a lot that we can aim for. Like, we live in a pretty safe, tame society. Oh, I just did that meme. We live in a society, lol. Anyway, yeah. So I think as people kind of constructed sort of the American dream, quote unquote, one of the things that they didn't account for was a challenge or adventure, sort of. They didn't, it kind of feels like that quote from Dark Knight Rises where Bane goes, "Peace has cost you your strength, victory has defeated you." They didn't account for the fact that people need a challenge or something to aim for. And you might say I'm over intellectualizing games, but you know, they're a $1 billion um, market. So, I mean, what does that say? Well, I think one of the reasons why, well, one of the things I've always found really interesting is the sort of correlation between the rise of video games in the 70s and like child kidnappings in the 70s. Like, that caused people to say, okay, kids, you can't just go all over town. You've got to stay inside, be safe, only go this far. I noticed that in the 70s, when sort of child kidnappings were on the rise and parents got really, really cautious, um, that's about the time that video games became a thing. Because the first video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, was introduced, I believe, in 1972. And then there were several Pong clones from just about everybody. And then the first dedicated home console systems started coming out, I think in 76 or 77. There were a ton of them. That kind of culminated in the video game crash of 1983 in America. But yeah, there was a gluttony of systems that more than you could count. And yeah, the market was oversaturated. So, getting back to the whole kidnapping thing. So, parents got a bit more cautious and said, well, you can't go outside. And they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? And here comes video games. They provide fun for children in the safety of their home. And then, of course, parents complain about like their kids never going outside to play. Well, you let a system breed a bunch of psychopaths that were gonna go after your kids. So, I mean, whose fault is that really? And it does make me curious. Like, where did these dudes come from? Were there always weirdos lurking in the shadows that were gonna do harm? Or did the media decide, oh, this is much more tantalizing than anything else? I've gotta wonder. Like, did people just get more effed up than they used to be? Or was it that there was just a spotlight shown on him? I remember my mom talking about how she could go walk down to a store and they didn't worry about stuff happening. It's really crazy that that was ever possible. And now, of course, people complain about kids being glued to their phones. And I find that ironic because it isn't just kids. I think I've seen people of every age glued to their phone. We've just gotten used to a constant feed of dopamine, and on paper that shouldn't sound like a bad thing, but it's interesting. If we're going to make a comparison to people and computers, one of the things about processors, and if I'm getting this wrong, if there are any computer people out there, please let me know. There's only so much information that a processor can handle at a single time before they like start slowing down. That's one of the reasons why on the old Game Boy, if there were too many sprites on screen, you'd see some lag time and things would start slowing down. Particularly Super Mario Land 2 Six Golden Coins was notorious for this, but even then it handled it pretty well. It's one of those things where I kind of feel likewise. People have this constant flow of information, and yeah, they don't know how to process it. Or we haven't, it feels unprecedented, really, because we've never had so much access to information constantly. I mean, I can remember I got my first smartphone in 2016, and I kind of fell into the same bad habits as everyone else. As soon as I get remotely bored, I pull out my phone. And I've noticed I feel like I'm kind of happier when I decide to let my phone charge on the inside, and time goes by a lot quicker. And I'm like, really? I've given some thought to giving up a smartphone and just going and getting an old flip phone. I mean, I would probably save myself a lot of money on like data usage, And they're not paying me to say this, but with what is it called? Not Sprint, the other S word, Spectrum. Yes, with Spectrum, I've got a plan where I put, say, I think $45 to my data usage, and I get unlimited minutes, and then $45 to the actual phone payment itself. And that's a way better deal than I ever got with T-Mobile. But anyway, yeah, so it's people get really nostalgic for like a different time, and I wonder if it's like if those times are so great or if they had that time back, meaning like they had more opportunity. I mean, it might be a little bit of both. Like, it's funny. I know that smartphones were like, they came out in their sort of current incarnation in 2007, but I really feel that smartphones were like the real death of the 90s. No, I mean, I guess what I mean by that is by the end of the 90s, we had the internet, and there was even some primitive like internet sites that like YouTube. We didn't have that yet, but there were some things that were kind of close to it. You could sort of play video online. We kind of had the template for things that would happen in the 2000s. But I really feel like there was a strong enough aftertaste from the 90s that persisted into the 2000s. And gradually, of course, the 2000s overtook with their own identity. But I really do feel like the smartphone was sort of the nail on the coffin of the 90s, where that influence was done and it was, totally cut off. Well, this is going to be a very short podcast today. As I'm still new to this, I'm kind of getting my feet wet and trying to figure out what I want to do with this. So I'm going to try to get some guests on here so it won't just be me ranting. Hopefully today's episode was better than yesterday. Well, have an absolutely super day, and we'll see you next time.